It's Thursday, the 27th February 2025. Let's take a look at the headlines making waves in Nigeria today. First, the Punch newspaper. The leading story: election cases. APC account seized over 8.9 billion naira debt, says Ganduje. Party incurs legal fees. Others from presidentials, governorship, legislative election cases. You can get all of this story on page 2 of the Punch newspaper and above the leading story from the left. Importers fret as Dangote lowers petrol price again. You can get the complete story on page 27 of the Punch newspaper. 1.9 billion naira fraud. Ex-Accountant General seeks out-of-court settlement. You can get the complete story on page 16 of the Punch newspaper. Concerns as forest reserves drop $2.3 billion amid naira gains. You can get the complete story on page 29 of the Punch newspaper. Niger, others exit from ECOWAS, affecting counter-insurgency war, says Air Chief. You can get the complete story on page 16 of the Punch newspaper and below the leading story from the left. Pro-Obasa clerk barred from assembly, threatening contempt suit. You can get the complete story on page 26 of the Punch newspaper. Immigration arrests 378 illegal immigrants in Ogun. You can get the complete story on page 16 of the Punch newspaper. US aid donated drugs found in Lagos, Abia markets, says NAFDAC. You can get the complete story on page 26 of the Punch newspaper. Moving over to the next paper, Nigerian Tribune, the leading story. Tinubu at APC neck. Asks Ganduje to reconcile aggrieved members. NEC passes vote of confidence in him. Ganduje. Buhari, El-Rufai, Fayemi absent. Party replies El-Rufai. You can get all of the story on page 4 of the Tribune and above the leading story. Mbeki to chair 2025 Obafemi Awolowo Memorial Webinar on March 6. You can get the complete story on page 3 of the Tribune and below the leading story from the left. Ogun government begins toiling on Epe Mojada Ijabo-Ode Expressway. You can get the complete story on page 24 of the Tribune. Court grants bail to Lagos Assembly workers arranged over fracas with DSS. You can get the complete story on page 3 of the Tribune. Immigration arrests 376 illegal immigrants in Ogun. You can get the complete story on page 21 of the Tribune. US aid, UNFPA condoms, antiretroviral drugs found in sealed markets, said NAFDAC. Says over 1 trillion naira worth of expired drugs seized by security operatives. You can get all of this story on page 30 of the Tribune. Dangote petrol to sell for 860 naira in Lagos, 870 naira in Southwest. You can get all of this story on page 6 of the Tribune. Moving over to the next paper, Vanguard, the leading story. APC NEC meeting. Buhari, Obasanjo, Amechi absent as Tinubu woes aggrieved members. You can get the complete story on page 5 of the Vanguard and above the leading story. Dangote slashes petrol price by 65 naira to 825 naira per litre. You can get the complete story on page 19 of the Vanguard. Scores feared dead as Boko Haram attacks Adamawa communities. You can get the complete story on page 13 of the Vanguard. My life in danger. NAFDAC DG cries out. You can get the complete story on page 7 of the Vanguard. Tinubu's Muslim government has brought massive suffering, says Sharia Council. You can get the complete story on page 8 of the Vanguard and below the leading story from the right. Judge dismisses recasual request in Emefiele's trial. You can get the complete story on page 10 of the Vanguard. We have restored normalcy in Northeast, says Army. You can get the complete story on page 13 of the Vanguard. Trump floats $5 million gold card as route to US citizenship. You can get the complete story on page 8 of the Vanguard. Nasima hopes to NAS remove sanctions of tax bill that imposes taxes on FTZ. You can get the complete story on page 9 of the Vanguard. 2026 World Cup. Bafana coach wary of Super Eagles, says group still open. You can get the complete story on page 30 of the Vanguard. Moving over to the next paper, Daily Trust, the leading story. Gunmen abduct 4 female varsity students in Benue. Waylaid on way for studies. Protest on campus. School closed. You can get all of this story on page 4 of the Daily Trust, and above the leading story from the left. APC passes vote of confidence on Tinubu. Ganduje. You can get the complete story on page 10 of the Daily Trust. Dangote reduces petrol price to 825 naira. You can get the complete story on page 11 of the Daily Trust. Tax reform. Sharia Council. FCT imams Yadudu reject inheritance law VAT hike. You can get the complete story on page 23 of the Daily Trust, and below the leading story. Nigeria's reserve drops by $2.2 billion as federal government defends Naira. You can get the complete story on page 3 of the Daily Trust. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso exit from ECOWAS, increasing burden on military, says Air Chief. You can get the complete story on page 3 of the Daily Trust. Top military officers among 46 killed in Sudan plane crash. You can get the complete story on page 26 of the Daily Trust. Man bagged 6 months for stealing chicken. You can get the complete story on page 17 of the Daily Trust. Moving over to the next paper, Business Day, the leading story. Inside Nigeria's controversial drug market raid. You can get the complete story on page 31 of the newspaper. Beside the leading story from the right, economic reforms pay off with strongest growth since 2021. You can get the complete story on page 31 of the newspaper, and below the leading story from the left. Omo states rise 18 times as CBN tightens nose on inflation. You can get the complete story on page 30 of the newspaper. Tax reform. Reps pledges transparent laws as opposition grows. You can get the complete story on page 30 of the newspaper. Moving over to the last paper on the list, The Guardian, the leading story. Second term. Amid draw, APC NEC passes vote of confidence in Tinubu. Ganduje. You can get the complete story on page 6 of The Guardian, and above the leading story from the left. Dangote slashes PMS price by 65 naira. Ipman warns of marketers' loss. You can get the complete story on page 3 of The Guardian. Tax reform. Kanu warns against breach of federal characters, Muslims' rights. You can get the complete story on page 3 of The Guardian. And below the leading story from the right. Olukoyode, organized foreign fraudsters establishing cells in Nigeria. You can get the complete story on page 2 of The Guardian. NAFDAC boss raises alarm over threat after historic 1 trillion naira illicit drug seizure. You can get the complete story on page 6 of The Guardian. FCCPC tackles rising cost of drugs, begins inquiry. You can get the complete story on page 5 of The Guardian. Again, police alert to looming violent protest in Kano. You can get the complete story on page 30 of The Guardian. Importers warns of possible port disruption as new MPA tariff begins March 1. You can get the complete story on page 15 of The Guardian. Banks' fraud-related losses rise by 350% to 52.3 billion naira in 5 years. You can get the complete story also on page 15 of The Guardian, and these are the headlines making waves in Nigeria today. If any of these headlines caught your attention, do get a copy of the paper to read the complete story.
Visit Housing TV Africa on YouTube and click on the subscribe button. Subscribe to Housing TV Africa to stay updated on latest happenings in Nigeria's housing sector. Follow our social media pages, like and share our posts on Facebook, Housing TV Africa, on Twitter, Housing TV Africa, Instagram, Housing TV Africa. Join the conversation and keep up with latest housing updates.
Housing TV Africa, your first in housing development broadcasting.